The air in the boardroom felt thick, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Mark Halstead's voice cracked through it like a whip. "Adjust the numbers, or you're out." His finger jabbed toward me, sharp as a spear. My pulse hammered in my ears, but my voice came out steadier than I expected. "I won't falsify safety reports. The data says 12% improvement. Federal standards require 15. If we send this product to market as premium, we're lying and buildings fall when people lie." Mark leaned back in his chair, a thin smile curling on his lips. Then, louder, for everyone at the table to hear, "You're just a little girl who doesn't belong in this room. Maybe when you grow up, you'll understand how business works." The words stung like acid. 6 executives shifted in their seats, their eyes flicking between us, but none spoke. No one came to my defense. Silence pressed on my chest, heavier than his insult. As I gathered my notes, I caught movement near the end of the table. The junior legal advisor, new, quiet, barely noticeable in most meetings, angled his phone just slightly. The faint red dot of a recording app glowed against the dark screen. He wasn't looking at me, but he wasn't looking away either. My heart tripped. Someone had decided this moment mattered enough to capture. I rose slowly, smoothing the crease of my skirt, making sure my heels clicked with each step toward the door. Behind me, Mark's voice rang out again. "If you walk out now, you'll never work in this industry again. I'll see to it personally." I didn't turn. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing my hands shake. The door closed behind me with a final thud, but the insult followed, echoing louder than his threats. In the quiet of the corridor, memories pressed in. I was 10 again, standing behind the counter of my father's hardware store, listening to a customer tell him, "Your daughter's too small to lift a box like that." My father had smiled, told me to carry it anyway. I had, even though my arms burned. That was the first time I learned what it meant to be underestimated. Now, decades later, the words "little girl" had returned, sharper, meant to break me. But they didn't. They carved into something older, deeper, a resolve that had been forged long before I walked into this boardroom. I straightened my shoulders, exhaled slowly, and began the long walk back to my office, already sensing this battle was only beginning. Back in my office, I shut the door and sat at my desk, palms pressed flat against the wood. The silence felt heavier than the boardroom had. Termination was inevitable. I told myself, people like me didn't win against people like Mark Halstead. I stacked my reports neatly, as though order on the page might create order in my future. 2 hours crawled past, each minute punctuated by the tick of the clock on my wall. When the phone rang, I nearly knocked it off the receiver. "This is Celeste," I said, forcing professionalism into my voice. "Celeste, this is Jonas Whitlock. The board wants your account of this morning's meeting. My office, now, the CEO, not HR, not Mark. The CEO." I ended the call, gathered my notes, and stepped into the corridor, through the glass wall. I caught sight of Mark strolling past, mask of confidence still plastered across his face. On impulse, I lifted my phone slightly, tilting it just enough to suggest I was replaying something. His eyes flicked to the screen, then back to me. For the briefest moment, color drained from his cheeks. He recovered quickly, but the crack was there. He knew someone had seen, someone had heard. When I reached the elevator, his voice followed me like oil on water. "You think this little stunt saves you? You'll never work again. I'll make sure every door in this industry slams shut in your face." I didn't answer. His threats rang loud, but his tone wasn't solid anymore. There was a tremor beneath it, the faint edge of panic. The elevator doors opened and I stepped inside, clutching my notes like armor. My reflection in the steel panel looked pale but steady. This wasn't termination. This was testimony. The board wanted to hear me. As the elevator carried me upward, I realized I wasn't walking into an ending. I was walking into a beginning one that would test whether truth could stand taller than power. And for the first time all day, I felt the faintest spark of hope as the doors slid open to the executive floor. Walking toward the CEO's office, my mind drifted back to Indiana, to the smell of sawdust and machine oil in my father's hardware store. Gareth Marin was a man of simple words and unshakable standards. I could still hear him, crouch beside me as I fumbled with a handsaw, measure twice, cut once. Buildings fall when people lie. I grew up with that mantra stitched into my bones. While other kids went to football games or dances, I balanced the cash register, restocked shelves, and studied late under the flicker of fluorescent lights. College wasn't a given, it was a fight. I worked double shifts at a diner, saved every dollar, and carried textbooks that felt heavier than I did. Professors dismissed me before I spoke. "Engineering isn't for girls," one muttered as I turned in a paper. Another suggested I switch to accounting, something less technical. Each slight was another nail I refused to let them hammer into my coffin. I fought for my place, not by shouting, but by showing up, again and again, with work so precise they couldn't ignore it. Sacrifice carved deep lines in my early years. Friends faded, boyfriends vanished, but the standards my father planted in me kept growing. Integrity wasn't a virtue, it was survival. Now, in this tower of glass and steel, those same standards felt like both my shield and my target. Mark saw my refusal not as strength, but as weakness, an obstacle to bulldoze. Yet the thought of bending the numbers, of letting a building rise on false promises, felt like betrayal not just to the profession, but to my father's voice that still echoed in me. I couldn't bear to be his disappointment. As I reached Jonas Whitlock's office, my reflection in the glass door looked older than my years, etched with the miles of every fight behind me. I drew a breath, hearing my father's words once more, and stepped inside, ready to face the weight of evidence and the lies stacked against me. By the next morning, the air in the office felt different. Conversations hushed when I walked past, eyes lingered, and my team's usual greetings stumbled into silence. Whispers moved faster than I did, curling down corridors and sticking to me like smoke. At first, I thought it was just fallout from Mark's tirade in the boardroom, but then Iris, usually steady as bedrock, lingered at my desk after our morning huddle. She leaned closer, voice barely above a whisper. "People are saying you altered the reports yourself, that you panicked and tried to cover it up." I blinked, stunned. "That's not true." Her mouth tightened. "I know, but there's an email." Iris slid a printout across my desk. My stomach dropped. It was addressed to the executive team, dated 2 weeks earlier. The message read, "Numbers are close enough. Let's adjust so we meet standards now. We can resolve later batches." The tone was careless, almost smug. And at the bottom, my signature, my name, my initials in the digital trail. My chest tightened. I never wrote those words. I would never put such a request in writing. But the formatting, the timestamp, it all looked authentic. I shook my head, forcing air into my lungs. This is a forgery. Iris searched my face, looking for cracks. Then someone wants it to look real. As she left, my phone buzzed in my pocket. Unknown number. "You don't know what you started. Hope it was worth it." My hand trembled around the device. I set it face down on the desk, knuckles white. Mark wasn't just spreading rumors, he was manufacturing them. He wanted me to look reckless, dishonest, unfit for the position I held. And the terrifying part was how convincing it already looked. An email, a whisper, a nudge. And suddenly, the story wasn't his word against mine anymore. It was his forged evidence against my truth. I closed my eyes, steadying myself. If this was the game he wanted to play, then I would have to find a way to beat him at it without losing the very integrity he mocked me for. The boardroom was colder than I remembered, the walls lined with directors in tailored suits, their expressions unreadable. Mark sat at the far end of the table, shoulders squared, voice smooth as silk. "Miss..." Marin panicked. He said, gesturing toward me as though I were a junior analyst caught misfiling paperwork. She knew the reports didn't meet the premium classification, so she tried to hide her mistakes. When I confronted her, she threatened to shift the blame. A murmur rippled through the room. Some directors nodded. Others kept their eyes fixed on me. His words were polished, rehearsed, carefully framed to sound reasonable. When it was my turn, I stood, sliding my binder across the table. Here are the original test results. Flame resistance improvement, 12.4%. The required standard, 15%. The numbers speak for themselves. I walked them through the protocols, the comparison charts, the industry benchmarks. My voice was steady, but as I glanced up, I saw eyes glazing, attention drifting. Technical truth was losing against his charisma. I felt the weight of defeat creeping in until I tapped my laptop and projected the footage onto the screen. The image flickered Mark, late at night, swiping his badge at the lab door. He walked to the storage cabinet, unlocked it, and removed 6 containers, each labeled with failing batch numbers. He slipped them into his briefcase, glanced around, and left. The silence was immediate and absolute. One director leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. "Mr. Halstead, care to explain why you removed samples from secured storage?" Mark's jaw tightened. They were contaminated. Then why no transfer documentation?" I asked softly. He stammered, words collapsing before they formed. "Evelyn Sorrell, the board chair," cleared her throat. "Effective immediately. Mr. Halstead is placed on leave pending investigation. Miss Marin, you'll report directly to Jonas until further notice." The gavel of her voice struck final. I gathered my papers, feeling Mark's eyes burn into me as security escorted him out. He didn't look beaten, only dangerous. And in that look, I knew this battle had just changed its shape. The fallout spread faster than the smoke. By the end of the week, clients were calling with concerns, hinting they might delay contracts until compliance stability was restored. Investors pressed for updates, their voices clipped with suspicion. I walked through the halls and felt eyes slide off me, as though I carried contagion. Then my phone lit up with a number I knew by heart. My father's voice came through, rough and tired. "Celeste, the bank just called. They're foreclosing. 30 years of payments, and now they say the loan's been called due." My throat went dry. "Dad, that doesn't make sense. You've never missed a payment." That's what I told them. But they wouldn't explain. Just said the note changed hands. Some buyer wants it paid in full. I pressed my palm against the desk, cold realization sinking in. Mark's promise echoed in my head. "You'll never work again. I'll make sure of it." He hadn't stopped at me. He had reached for the one person who embodied everything I stood for. That night, I sat in a quiet suburban cafe, nursing a coffee that had gone cold. At 8:10, Donna Pell walked in. She looked smaller out of the office, her posture stiff with nerves. She slid into the booth across from me, eyes darting around as though expecting Mark to appear. "I don't have much time," she whispered. from her bag. She pulled a worn black notebook, its spine nearly broken. She pushed it across the table. I opened it to pages filled with neat handwriting dates, client names, payments, veiled threats. It wasn't just office gossip. It was a ledger of Mark's empire corruption cataloged in detail. "Why are you giving me this?" I asked. Her lips pressed together, trembling slightly. "Because I've watched him ruin people. And now he's trying to ruin you." I traced my finger over the inked lines, the evidence heavy as a weapon in my hands. She leaned closer. "Just be careful, Celeste. If he even suspects I spoke to you, I'm finished." I closed the notebook, slipped it into my bag, and walked out with the weight of both salvation and danger pressing against my side. The night after meeting Donna, I pulled into my driveway and noticed the faintest shift. My front door was ajar, the deadbolt not fully turned. My chest tightened. I lived alone, and I never left it that way. I called Iris, my most trusted analyst, and within 20 minutes she stood beside me on the porch, flashlight in hand. "You sure you want to go in?" she whispered. "I don't want to, but I have to." We stepped inside cautiously. Nothing looked overturned, no drawers yanked out, no smashed glass. At first glance, everything was normal, too normal. That was what unsettled me most. In my bedroom, Iris's beam caught a glint between the books on my shelf. She leaned closer, squinting. "It's a lens." My stomach dropped. She lifted the tiny device and showed me a camera, disguised as a wireless router port. We searched the rest of the house. Under the kitchen table, another. In the corner of my office, a third. Then the bathroom directly facing the shower. My throat burned with anger. But the fourth device stopped me cold. It wasn't transmitting. No wiring, no battery, no signal. Just a hollow shell with a lens that led to nothing. A fake. Iris looked at me, wide-eyed. "He wants you to find it. Wants you rattled." The realization settled over me like ice. Mark wasn't just watching. He was staging a performance designed to break me. I straightened, forcing the rage into something colder. "We leave them. All of them." Iris blinked. "You can't be serious. These are in your bathroom. Celeste, I'm serious. If I rip them out, he knows I'm aware. If I leave them, he keeps thinking I'm blind, and I want him confident because that's when he makes mistakes." Iris hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. That night, I didn't sleep in my own bed. I crashed on Iris's couch, the notebook from Donna resting on the coffee table, cameras still alive back at my house. Mark wanted me to panic. Instead, I was already planning how to turn his own surveillance into the trap he never saw coming. Donna's notebook was a labyrinth, but one page caught my eye, a set of codes, dates, and a name circled twice, Whale-Crest Holdings. A shell company in the Cayman Islands, tied to Mark's signature and his wife's name, his insurance policy, his way out. The next morning, I booked a red-eye flight under a name that would raise no suspicion. My stomach churned as the plane cut through the night sky, but my focus stayed sharp. This wasn't a trip for revenge. This was survival for me and for my father. The Cayman sun hit like a hammer when I landed. I hailed a cab to a quiet financial district where glass towers gleamed against the turquoise sea. My pulse raced as I stepped into the bank lobby, clutching a folder that Donna had marked with every detail I would need. "I'm here to see Mr. Neville," I said at the desk, introducing myself as Marion Halstead, Mark's wife. Minutes later, a thin man with a British accent greeted me, ushered me into a private office, and asked for authorization. My voice didn't shake as I recited the alphanumeric sequence. His fingers tapped at the keyboard, his eyes flicking to the monitor, then back to me with a polite nod. "Everything is in order, Mrs. Halstead. How shall we proceed?" I slid 2 slips of paper across the desk. First, transfer $325,000 to this account. It was my father's business account in Indiana, the lifeline he needed. And the rest? I continued. To this escrow account, controlled by external counsel. Mr. Neville raised an eyebrow but processed the request without question. When I stepped back onto the street, the Caribbean heat wrapped around me, but I felt only cool relief. In one move, I had cut Mark off from his escape and secured my father's store. I checked my watch. Less than 24 hours until the next board meeting. I still had time to make it home and time to prepare for the storm that would follow when Mark realized his millions were gone. The boardroom felt like a theater, every director in place, tension sharp enough to cut. Mark swept in with a high-profile attorney at his side, his smile tight and triumphant. My client has been the victim of a calculated smear campaign. The attorney began smoothly. Evidence presented previously was fabricated by a disgruntled assistant. Furthermore, we have reason to believe Ms. Marin engaged in embezzlement, siphoning funds offshore. Gasps moved around the table, eyes darting to me. I rose slowly, smoothing my jacket. "If you mean this," I said, projecting documents onto the screen. "These are the transfers." "Yes. I moved money from Whalecrest Holdings, Mr. Halstead's shell company. I let the words settle. $325,000 saved my father's store. The rest now sits in escrow under independent counsel. Every cent accounted for." The room stilled. Evelyn Sorrell's gaze flicked from the screen to Mark. His jaw tightened. But I didn't stop. Donna Pell's notes. I continued, sliding the black notebook forward. 7 years of his dealings, blackmail, falsified reports, intimidation. Mark's attorney leaned in to object, but I pressed the final button. The screen shifted to a live feed federal agents moving through Mark's home office. Laptops bagged, files sealed in boxes, Mark's face drained of color. He shot to his feet, pointing at me with trembling hands. "You little." His words broke as he lunged across the table, but 2 security guards intercepted him, forcing him back. The board erupted. Evelyn's voice cut through the chaos. "Mr. Halstead is removed from his position pending criminal prosecution. Miss Marin, remain available for cooperation with authorities." As Mark was dragged out, still shouting, I gathered my notes in silence. My hands no longer trembled. The storm I had braced for was here, and I was still standing. When the doors closed behind him, I realized the question was no longer whether I could survive his attacks, but what I would do with the space his downfall had just created. 3 months later, the front windows of my father's hardware store glowed with new life. Fresh paint, brighter displays, customers flowing in steady waves. Gareth moved among the aisles with a lighter step, the lines of worry gone from his face. The foreclosure notice had been nothing more than a scar on the wall now painted over. Watching him ring up a family buying tools for their first home felt like breathing again. Back in Chicago, the board approached me with an offer Mark's old chair. The power and prestige he had once wielded. I listened, nodded, and quietly declined. I hadn't fought this war to sit in the same seat he poisoned. My vision wasn't to inherit his shadow, but to build something of my own. The settlements and regulatory support gave me that chance. Within weeks, I registered the Marin Institute for Safety Integrity. It wasn't just a company, it was a covenant. Independent, funded by penalties and government contracts, designed to audit without bias. And the first client forced to contract with us, by order of the board, was the very firm Mark had tried to use against me. I stood in our modest new office, sunlight slanting across rows of desks where analysts pored over blueprints and compliance codes. Iris was there. Donna, too, both choosing to rebuild alongside me. For the first time, I felt not like an outlier, but like the anchor of a new foundation. When a reporter asked why I refused the COO title, I gave the only answer that mattered. He mocked me as a little girl. I said, voice steady, unflinching. Now the industry calls me its conscience. I looked out at the skyline, the city humming with construction and ambition, and knew my victory wasn't in tearing someone down. It was in creating a standard that would outlive us all.